I am 62 years old. For most of my life, I believed that family was the only thing that truly mattered. I raised my son, David, with that principle at the very core of his being. I thought I had succeeded. I thought he understood that love and loyalty were currencies far more valuable than anything you could keep in a bank. It took one cold Christmas afternoon for me to realize how profoundly I had failed, or rather, how profoundly he had forgotten. The day had started like any other Christmas. The air in his large, sterile house was filled with the scent of pine from the towering tree in the living room and the expensive, spiced candles his wife, Chloe, insisted on burning. My grandson, little Leo, was tearing through presents with the boundless energy only a 6-year-old possesses. I sat on a plush white sofa, a cup of tea warming my hands, trying my best to feel a part of the scene. It was a beautiful picture, a perfect family Christmas, but I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of it. For the past 5 years, I had lived in the small house at the back of their property. David and Chloe called it the guest house, a term that had always felt a little dismissive, a little temporary. But I had made it my home. It was where I kept the last remaining pieces of my life with my late husband, Mark. His favorite armchair, the worn quilt my grandmother had made, the photos that lined the small mantelpiece. It was my sanctuary. The trouble began after lunch. David had just given Chloe a ridiculously expensive diamond bracelet. She held up her wrist, letting the stones catch the light, a triumphant smile on her face. Their friends, another wealthy couple named the Hendersons, were suitably impressed. "David, you spoil her," Mrs. Henderson said with a light laugh. Chloe beamed. "He knows how to take care of his family," she said, her eyes flicking over to me for just a second. It was a look I had become accustomed to, one that measured and dismissed me in the same instant. Later, as we were clearing the plates, Chloe sighed dramatically. "We just have no room," she announced to no one in particular, yet to everyone at once. "With Leo getting bigger and with a new baby coming, this house is starting to feel so cramped." I froze, my hand hovering over a stack of dishes. A new baby? David hadn't told me they were expecting again. A cold knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't the news of a grandchild that bothered me, it was the context, the way she said it. It felt like a chess move, and I was a pawn she was preparing to sacrifice. David, ever the dutiful husband, chimed in immediately. "I know, honey. We've been talking about options." Chloe looked directly at me then, her smile thin and sharp. "Well, we do have the guest house. If we could just free up that space, we could hire a live nanny. It would make all the difference." The air went still. The Hendersons looked uncomfortable. I could feel their pity, and it burned worse than Chloe's malice. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to remind his wife that the guest house was his mother's home. He just shifted his weight, avoiding my gaze. "It's a thought, honey. We can discuss it later." But Chloe was not one to be put off. "There's nothing to discuss. Your mother is retired. She could find a lovely little apartment somewhere. Something more manageable for her." She said the word manageable, as if I were a feeble old woman, incapable of looking after the 2 small rooms I called home. My voice was quiet when I finally spoke. "This is my home, Chloe." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "It's a house. A guest house on our property. It's not like you own it." I turned to David, my heart pleading with him. "David, tell her." He finally looked at me, his face a mask of strained patience, the kind a parent wears when a child is being difficult. He was treating me like a child. He took a deep breath, puffing out his chest. It was his "I am the man of the house" posture. "Mom," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's be realistic. Chloe has a point. You're living in my guest house. It's my property. We've been very generous, but we have to think about our growing family now." The words hit me like physical blows. My guest house. My property. Generous. Each word was a betrayal, a rewriting of our entire history. The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. I felt the blood drain from my face. All I could do was stare at the son I no longer recognized, the man who had just publicly stripped me of my home, my dignity, and my past. That was the moment everything broke. That was the moment I stopped being his loving, supportive mother and started becoming something else entirely. Something he would not see coming. He thought he was powerful because he had money. I was about to teach him what real power was. It was the power of truth, and I held the only copy that mattered. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling slightly. I did not say another word. I simply placed the plates I was holding onto the counter, turned, and walked out of the room. I walked through the grand foyer, past the ridiculously large Christmas tree, and out the front door. I did not grab my coat. The cold winter air was a welcome shock, a sharp slap of reality that cleared some of the fog of hurt and disbelief. I walked down the stone path to my small house, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside my home, my real home, I sank into Mark's armchair. The worn fabric felt like a comforting embrace. The silence was a relief after the strange cheer of the main house. I looked around at the familiar objects, the tangible pieces of my life. David's words echoed in my head. My guest house, my property. He had not just said them. He had declared them. He had made his position clear in front of his wife and his important friends. I was not family. I was an occupant, a tenant on his land, living there by his good graces. The generosity he spoke of was a cruel fiction, a story he had told himself so many times that he now believed it. But I knew the truth. I knew where the money for this house had come from. I knew whose land it was built on. My mind went back 7 years, to the time just after Mark passed away. I was adrift in grief, and David was just starting his business. He was full of ambition and ideas, but he had very little capital. I had inherited our family home, fully paid off, and a modest life insurance policy from Mark. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to live comfortably. David came to me with a proposal. He wanted to sell my house, which was in a neighborhood that was rapidly appreciating in value. "Mom, the upkeep on that place is too much for you alone," he had said, his voice full of concern. "And it's more space than you need. If you sell it, you can invest the money with me. I'll get you a much better return than any bank." I was hesitant. That house was where I had raised him, where Mark and I had built our life together. But David was persuasive. He painted a picture of a secure future for me and a launch pad for his own success. He said he wanted to buy a large property, a place where we could all live. He would build a main house for his family and a smaller, separate home for me on the same land. "You'll have your own space, your independence, but I'll be right there if you ever need anything," he had promised. "We'll be a family, all together." It sounded wonderful. It sounded safe. So I agreed. I sold my home, the place filled with 40 years of memories. I also gave him the entirety of Mark's life insurance payout. It was every last penny I had in the world. I transferred it all to his business account. He used that money to buy this land and to fund the construction of both houses. He told me the smaller house, my house, was my investment. He was just managing it for me. It was my nest egg, my security. The legal part had been a blur. David had handled everything with his lawyers. He had me sign a document called a quitclaim deed. He explained it was just a formality to put the entire property under one title to make managing the taxes and utilities simpler. He said it was for my own protection. "This way, Mom, everything is consolidated. It's cleaner. But we all know the little house is yours," he had assured me, patting my hand. I trusted him. He was my son. I signed the paper, without reading every line of the fine print. I was grieving and vulnerable, and he was my rock. Or so I thought. Now, sitting in the quiet of my little home, I realized he had not been a rock. He had been a predator, and I had been his first, easiest mark. The generosity was not his. It was mine. I had generously given him my entire net worth. I had generously handed him the key to his future, and in return, he had handed me a tenancy that could be revoked at his wife's whim. The anger began to burn through the shock. It was a slow, deep burn, the kind that starts in your gut and spreads through your veins until your whole body is humming with it. How dare he? How dare he stand there, in a house built with my money, on land bought with my money, and call me a guest? How dare he erase my sacrifice, my love, my trust, and rebrand it as his own magnanimity? I thought about his life. The fancy cars, the designer clothes, the exclusive country club membership. It was all built on the foundation I had given him. He was not a self-made millionaire, as he so often claimed in interviews for business magazines. He was a son who had been given an extraordinary gift, a gift he had long since forgotten the source of. My eyes fell upon my late husband's old leather briefcase, tucked away in a corner. I had not opened it in years. It was full of his old papers, tax returns, and other things I could not bring myself to sort through after he was gone. On a sudden impulse, I got up and went to it. The leather was cool and smooth under my fingers. The clasps clicked open with a satisfying sound. I began to sift through the files, not sure what I was looking for. A sign, maybe. A piece of Mark's steady, sensible wisdom. And then I saw it. Tucked into a folder labeled Household was a thin manila envelope. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Inside was a single folded document. I unfolded it carefully. It was the quitclaim deed. The original. The one I had signed in the lawyer's office 7 years ago. I stared at it, my mind racing. I remembered that day clearly now. David had been in a hurry. He had pushed the document in front of me, pointing to the signature line. The notary, a friend of his, had stamped it quickly. David had taken the document, saying he would file it with the county recorder's office. "I'll handle all the boring stuff, Mom," he had said with a smile. But he never did. Or, if he did, this original document should not be in my possession. He must have filed a copy. But why would I have the original? I remembered now. In the flurry of packing up my old house, I had been putting important documents into that briefcase for safekeeping. I must have put the deed in there by mistake, thinking it was something else. David, in his haste and arrogance, must have assumed he had the original and never followed up. He never asked for it. He just proceeded as if the transaction was complete. A slow smile spread across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was a smile of cold, hard realization. If this was the original, signed and notarized deed, and it had never been officially recorded, then the transfer of my interest in this property had never been legally finalized. In the eyes of the law, the small parcel of land my house stood on, which had been legally separated from the main plot before the sale, might still be mine. The anger in my veins began to morph into something else. It was resolve. Cold, clear, and sharp as glass. David and Chloe wanted to talk about property. They wanted to discuss ownership and what was manageable. Fine. We would have that conversation. But we would have it on my terms, using the language of deeds and property law, not the murky, manipulative language of family obligation he had used to swindle me. My first call was not to David. It was to my oldest friend, Sarah. I had known her since kindergarten. She was a retired paralegal, and she had a mind like a steel trap. I explained the situation, my voice low and steady. I told her about Christmas, about David's words, about finding the deed. She listened patiently, without interruption. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Sarah, are you there?" I asked. "Oh, I'm here," she said, her voice tight with fury. "I'm just trying to decide whether I want to drive over there and slap that boy, or pour you a very large glass of wine." "The wine, please," I said, a small, shaky laugh escaping me. "Helen, this is unbelievable," she said. "He took everything from you, and then called it generosity. The nerve of that child." "He's not a child, Sarah. He's a man who has forgotten where he came from." "Well, we're about to give him a little reminder," she said, her voice shifting into professional mode. "First thing tomorrow morning, you're not calling David. You are not confronting Chloe. You're calling a lawyer. A good one. A real estate litigator. I have a name for you. His name is Arthur Evans. He's a shark, but he's our shark. A lawyer? Isn't that a bit much?" The old me, the peacekeeper, was still whispering in my ear. A bit much. Sarah's voice rose. He threatened to make you homeless so his wife can hire a nanny. There is no too much anymore, Helen. This is war. And you, my friend, have just found a nuclear weapon in your husband's old briefcase. Her words stiffened my spine. She was right. The time for quiet hurt and gentle reminders was over. David had drawn a line in the sand. He had defined our relationship in terms of property and ownership. I would have to meet him on that battlefield. The next morning, I called Mr. Evans. His voice was calm and professional. I told him the entire story, from the sale of my old house to the discovery of the unfiled deed. He listened intently, occasionally asking a sharp, clarifying question. Mrs. Miller, could you please read me the legal description of the property on the quitclaim deed? He asked. I read the complicated string of numbers and directions. And you are certain this is the original document? Not a copy. It has the notary's raised seal and the original ink signatures. I confirmed. And it has never been filed with the county recorder? Not to my knowledge. I've had it in my possession for 7 years. There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of him typing on his computer. This is very interesting, he said finally. In this state, an unrecorded deed is still valid between the grantor and the grantee. That's you and your son. However, it does not provide constructive notice to the rest of the world. And more importantly, if it was never delivered to and accepted by the grantee, the transfer may not have been legally completed. The fact that you have maintained possession of the original deed is a very powerful argument that the legal transfer of title was never finalized. My heart started to beat a little faster. So, what does that mean? It means, Mr. Evans said, a hint of excitement in his voice, that you may very well be the legal owner of the land your house sits on. Your son may have built a house on your property. The implications of his words began to sink in. For years, I had felt like a guest, a dependent. I had lived with a constant, low-level fear that my welcome would run out. But if Mr. Evans was right, the power dynamic was the complete opposite of what I had believed. I was not the tenant. He was. What's our next step? I asked, my voice firmer now. The next step is to confirm the chain of title. I'm going to do a full title search on the property. I need to see what deeds were recorded, if any. I also want to look into the financing of the property. You said your son has a large mortgage? Yes, on the main house. We need to see if your guest house property was included as collateral on that loan. If it was, and you are indeed the rightful owner, his bank is going to be very unhappy. It could constitute mortgage fraud. Mortgage fraud. The term sounded so serious, so criminal. It was a world away from the family disagreement I thought I was having. But that was the point, wasn't it? This had stopped being a family disagreement on Christmas Day. It had become a business transaction, and my son had been trying to swindle me. Do what you need to do, Mr. Evans, I said. I want to know exactly where I stand. I will have answers for you within 48 hours, he promised. Hanging up the phone, I felt a strange sense of calm. The path ahead was uncertain and likely to be painful, but for the first time in years, I did not feel helpless. I had an advocate. I had a plan. And I had the truth, folded neatly in a manila envelope. While I waited for Mr. Evans to call back, I tried to keep things as normal as possible. David called me the day after Christmas, his tone artificially bright. Hey, Mom, are you feeling better? You rushed off yesterday. I'm fine, David, I said, keeping my voice even. Good, good. Look, about what Chloe said, she was just stressed. You know how she gets. She didn't mean it to come out that way. It was a classic non-apology. Chloe was stressed. It came out wrong. No mention of his own words, his own public humiliation of me. She seemed to mean it quite clearly. I replied, my voice cool. He sighed, the sound of a man burdened by the emotional women in his life. Mom, can we not do this? The fact is, we need more space. It's just a practical reality. We need to start thinking about what's next for you. There it was again. For you, as if my future was a problem for him to solve, a loose end for him to tie up. I am thinking about it, David, I said. Very carefully. Good. There are some really nice senior communities not too far from here. They have activities, bingo, water aerobics. You'd make friends. He was trying to sell me on being put out to pasture. He was describing my future as a series of scheduled, trivial activities in a facility for the elderly. The condescension was staggering. I'll keep that in mind, I said, my voice tight. I have to go now, David. I hung up before he could reply. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my knuckles white. Every conversation, every word from him, just added more fuel to the fire burning inside me. He was not just thoughtless. He was actively trying to manage me out of his life, to place me in a neat, tidy box labeled Mother Problem, Solved. The call from Mr. Evans came 2 days later. It was the call that changed everything. Helen, it's Arthur Evans. I have the results of the title search. I held my breath. And it's just as we suspected, but even better for our case, he said. David filed a copy of a quitclaim deed with the county 7 years ago. But a copy is not the original. The recorder's office should not have even accepted it, but sometimes things slip through, especially if the notary stamp is clear on the copy. However, the fact remains that you retain the original, unrecorded document. An expert can easily tell the difference between an original signature and a photocopy. Your ownership was never legally extinguished. I let out a breath. I did not realize I had been holding. So it was true. It was my land. But that's not all, he continued, his voice grim. I looked into the financing. David and his wife took out a substantial home equity line of credit against the entire property 18 months ago. They listed the value of the main house and the auxiliary dwelling unit, your home, as collateral. So my house is securing his loan. Precisely. And he did so without the consent of the legal owner of that portion of the property, which is you. Helen, this is a very serious matter. This is bank fraud. The room started to spin a little. This was so much bigger and uglier than I had imagined. My son, my own child, had not only taken my money and my home, but he had also used my asset to secure his own debts, putting my home at risk without my knowledge. If he defaulted on that loan, the bank could try to foreclose on my home. My home. What can he face for this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Legally? Fines, possibly even jail time, though that's unlikely for a first offense. More practically, the bank will call the loan. They will demand immediate repayment of the entire amount, and it is a very, very large amount. It could ruin him financially. Ruin him. The words hung in the air between us. A part of me, the mother part that was now battered and bruised but not entirely dead, recoiled at the thought. But another, stronger part of me knew that this was a mess of his own making. He had built his glittering life on a foundation of lies and deceit. It was a house of cards, and I was just holding the card that would bring it all down. So, what do we do? I asked. We have several options, Mr. Evans explained. We can file a lawsuit to quiet the title, which would be a formal legal declaration that you are the owner. We can report the fraud to the bank and the district attorney. Or we can approach your son directly with this information and negotiate a settlement from a position of incredible strength. I thought about it for a long moment. A lawsuit would be public, messy, and draining. Reporting him to the authorities felt like a betrayal too far, even after everything he had done. The third option, however, was interesting. A negotiation. A chance to confront him, to see the look on his face when he realized his carefully constructed world was about to crumble. Let's consider the third option, I said. But I don't want to negotiate for a settlement. I don't want his money. I want something else. What do you want, Helen? A new idea was forming in my mind, a plan that was bold and final. It was a plan that would give me back my security, honor my late husband's memory, and teach my son a lesson he would never forget. I want to give my house away, I said. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the phone. Give it away? To whom? To the Children's Hospital, the one Mark used to support. He left a small provision for them in his will. He always said that helping sick children was the best investment anyone could make in the future. You want to donate the property to charity? Mr. Evans asked, his voice full of surprise. Yes, I said, the idea feeling more right with every second that passed. I want to sign a new quitclaim deed, a proper one this time. I want to transfer my ownership of this house and the land it's on directly to the hospital. And I want to do it before I say a single word to my son. Mr. Evans was quiet for a moment. I could almost hear the legal gears turning in his head. Helen, that is an incredibly powerful move, he said, his professional composure cracking just a little. It's brilliant. It takes the matter completely out of your son's hands. He won't be able to negotiate with you, or pressure you, or manipulate you. He will have to deal with the hospital's legal department, and they will not be as forgiving as a mother. Exactly, I said. We can have the documents drawn up today, he said, his voice now full of energy. We will have it signed, notarized, and I will personally walk it down to the county recorder's office and make sure it is filed correctly this time. By the end of the day tomorrow, the St. Jude Children's Hospital will be the legal owner of your home. There's one more thing, I said. When we draw up the deed, I want to include a provision. I want the hospital to grant me a life estate. A life estate, he repeated, allowing you to live in the home for the remainder of your life. At which point, full possession reverts to them. Of course. It's a standard arrangement in charitable property donations. It protects you completely. Your son cannot evict you. The hospital cannot evict you. You will have the legal right to live in that house until you die. It will finally, truly, be your home. My home. The words were a balm on my wounded heart. After all the years of uncertainty, of feeling like a guest, I was about to secure my home in the most ironclad way possible. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of activity. I met Mr. Evans at his office. He had the new quitclaim deed ready. I read every word carefully. It was simple, clear, and powerful. It transferred all my rights, title, and interest in the property described to the hospital. He had also prepared the life estate agreement. I signed both documents with a steady hand. The following afternoon, Mr. Evans called me. It's done, Helen. The deed has been recorded. The hospital's legal team has been notified, and they are overjoyed. They have already sent a welcome letter to you, acknowledging your incredible generosity and confirming your life estate. You are, for all legal intents and purposes, their most valued resident. I thanked him, my voice thick with emotion. When I hung up the phone, I looked around my little house. It was the same house, with the same furniture and the same photos on the mantelpiece. But it felt different. It felt solid. It felt safe. It felt like mine. Now, all that was left was to tell David. I decided to wait for the right moment. I did not have to wait long. New Year's Eve. Chloe and David were hosting their annual party. It was a lavish affair, designed to impress their friends and business associates. I was, as usual, expected to make an appearance. I dressed carefully that evening. I chose a simple, elegant dress in a deep blue. I felt a sense of calm I had not felt in years. I was not going to their party as David's dependent mother. I was going as a woman who knew her own worth and held all the cards. The party was in full swing when I arrived at the main house. Music was playing, champagne was flowing. Chloe, dressed in a glittering silver gown, was holding court. She saw me and her smile tightened. Helen, you made it, she said, her tone suggesting my presence was a minor inconvenience she had to endure. Of course, dear. I wouldn't miss it, I replied, my voice light and pleasant. I mingled for a while, making small talk. I saw David across the room, laughing with a group of men in expensive suits. He looked so confident, so powerful. He had no idea how fragile his world was. About an hour into the party, Chloe found me. She steered me towards a quieter corner of the room. Helen, we need to talk, she said, getting straight to the point. David and I have made a decision. We're going to be putting the guest house on the market after the holidays. I feigned surprise. On the market? Why would you do that? We need the capital to finance the new nursery wing, she said, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. And besides, We've found a wonderful apartment for you. It's in a very nice complex, just a few miles away. We can have you moved in by the end of January." She was not asking. She was telling. She had already planned my eviction, my relocation, my entire future. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. I took a slow sip of my water. "That's not going to be possible, Chloe." She frowned. "What do you mean it's not possible? We've already spoken to the realtor. It's a done deal." "I'm afraid it's not," I said, my voice still calm. "You see, you can't sell a property that you don't own." Chloe stared at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? Of course we own it. It's on our deed." "Why don't we ask David to join us?" I suggested sweetly. "I think he should be part of this conversation." I saw David nearby and motioned for him to come over. He excused himself from his friends and walked towards us, a slightly annoyed look on his face. "What's going on?" he asked. "Your mother is being difficult," Chloe said, crossing her arms. "I told her about our plans for the guest house, and she's refusing to cooperate." David's face hardened. He turned to me, his "I am the man of the house" posture returning. "Mom, we've been over this. This is our house, our property. We need you to be reasonable. We are trying to do what's best for our family." I looked from his stern face to Chloe's smug one. The moment had arrived. I took a deep breath. "David," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the party chatter around us. "You and I need to have a very serious talk about the meaning of the word property. You see, you seem to be under the impression that you own the house I live in." "I do own it," he said, his voice rising. "I have the deed." "Do you?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that? Are you sure you have the original, signed, notarized quitclaim deed? Or do you just have a copy?" The color started to drain from his face. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the dawning of a long-forgotten memory. He was remembering the rushed signing, the paperwork he never followed up on. What are you talking about?" he stammered. "I'm talking about the fact that the deed you had me sign was never filed," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing them to lean in. "I have had the original document in my possession for the last 7 years. The property was never legally transferred to you. You have been living next to me on my land, not the other way around." Chloe let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "That's absurd. You're lying. You're just a bitter old woman trying to cause trouble." "Am I?" I reached into my small handbag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was not the deed itself. It was a certified letter from the legal department of the St. Jude Children's Hospital. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain this." I handed the letter to David. He unfolded it with trembling hands. I watched his eyes scan the page. I saw the exact moment he understood. His face went from confusion to disbelief, to sheer, unadulterated panic. His skin turned a pasty white. He looked as if he was going to be sick. "What is it?" Chloe demanded, snatching the letter from his hand. She read it, her own expression mirroring her husband's. "Donation? Life estate? What is this nonsense?" "It's not nonsense," I said, my voice ringing with a finality that could not be denied. "It's a legally binding document. I have donated my property, the house and the land it sits on, to the Children's Hospital. As of yesterday afternoon, they are the legal owners. I am simply a tenant for life, under their protection. So, as I said, you can't sell my house, because it's not yours. And it never was." The silence that followed was more profound than any shout could have been. David just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. Chloe looked from the letter to me, her face a mask of fury and shock. The foundations of their perfect, curated life had just cracked wide open. You can't do that," David finally managed to choke out. "I can," I said. "And I have." "You wanted to talk about property, David. Well, the property has been dealt with. Permanently. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe your guests are waiting." I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there in the corner, holding the paper that signaled the end of their plans and the beginning of their nightmare. I walked through the crowd of their smiling, oblivious friends, my head held high. I did not feel vengeful. I did not feel triumphant. I felt free. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The very next week, David received a formal letter from the hospital's legal team. They informed him that a structure belonging to him, the main house, was partially encroaching on their newly acquired property line, a fact the survey Mr. Evans had commissioned had uncovered. They also informed him that the home equity line of credit he had taken out using their property as collateral constituted fraud. The bank was notified. As Mr. Evans had predicted, they immediately froze the line of credit and called the entire loan. David was suddenly faced with a demand for repayment of a sum so large it made my head spin. He did not have that kind of liquid cash. His wealth was tied up in stocks and assets, and the market was down. He called me, his voice frantic. "Mom, you have to undo this. You have to call the hospital and take it back. You're ruining me." "No, David," I said calmly. "You are ruining yourself. This is the consequence of your own actions. You built your life on a lie, and the bill has just come due. But the bank, my business, Chloe is threatening to leave me." "Those sound like your problems, not mine," I said. The words were cold, and a part of me felt a pang of sadness for the boy he once was. But that boy was long gone, replaced by this desperate, grasping man. "You wanted me to be more manageable, David. Well, I have managed my affairs perfectly. My future is secure. Can you say the same?" I hung up the phone. The news spread through their social circle like wildfire. The story became twisted, as stories do, but the basic facts were there. David had tried to evict his own mother, and she had outsmarted him, leaving him in financial ruin and public humiliation. The Hendersons, who had witnessed the initial confrontation on Christmas Day, were particularly vocal. David and Chloe became social pariahs. No one wanted to be associated with a man who would defraud a bank and swindle his own mother. Chloe, true to her word, left him. She took Leo and moved in with her parents. She could not handle the social fallout or the sudden, dramatic downturn in their financial status. David was forced to sell the main house at a loss to pay back the bank. He had to sell his fancy cars and his country club membership. He moved into a small, rented apartment, the kind he had probably envisioned for me. A few months later, he showed up at my door. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He was no longer the proud, confident millionaire. He was just a man who had lost everything. He stood on my doorstep, unable to meet my eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I was arrogant. I was greedy. I forgot what was important. I forgot you." He was crying now, silent tears rolling down his cheeks. The mother in me wanted to reach out, to comfort him, to tell him it would all be okay. But I could not. The wound was too deep. The trust was too broken. "I know you did, David," I said softly. Can you ever forgive me?" he asked, looking up at me, his eyes full of a desperate hope. I thought for a long moment. I looked past him, at the manicured lawn he used to own, at the empty space where his big, sterile house once stood. The new owners were a young family, and I could hear their children laughing. "Forgiveness is a long road, David," I said finally. "And you have only just taken the first step. You need to forgive yourself first. You need to figure out how to be a good man, not just a rich 1-inch. He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I will," he whispered. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying." He left, and I watched him walk away. I did not know if he would succeed. I did not know if our relationship could ever be repaired. But as I closed the door to my house, my safe and secure home, I knew that I had done the right thing. I had protected myself. I had honored my husband's memory. And I had given my son the most valuable gift of all, a lesson he had to learn the hard way. The house is quiet now. I spend my days gardening and reading. Sometimes representatives from the hospital stop by to check on the property and on me. They are kind, respectful people. They treat me not as a burden, but as a benefactor. They tell me stories about the children my gift is helping, about the lives that are being saved. I live a simple life, but it is a life of peace and dignity. I am no longer afraid. I am no longer a guest in someone else's life. I am the master of my own. My son learned that day that a house is just a building, but a home is something you can never truly own and should never, ever take for granted. He learned the difference between a gift and an investment. My love for him had always been a gift, freely given. The house, however, was an investment, and the return he got was a brutal, but necessary, lesson in gratitude. He finally learned what it feels like to be small, to be powerless, to have your future decided for you by someone else. And I hope, for his sake, that it is a lesson he never forgets.